This week on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast, I'm talking about how to pay for college before your young little one ever sets foot on a college campus. Well, if you're listening to this podcast, they're not so little anymore. They're probably getting pretty close to college, if not already in college. So today I want to run the numbers with you on how and why you should do this. Why should you try to pay for most of college before you even start? And then how can you do it? Okay, first of all, the why. The goal should be to set aside enough money for your child to pay for most of their college or post high school education, like a vocational school or trade school, whatever that route is. We want to pay for all of those expenses ideally, but most, because that's what's more realistic for most people. Already having the funds set aside creates tremendous peace of mind, knowing that you're not going to need to rely on a scholarship. You're not going to need to take out unknown sums of student loans to bridge that gap. If you think about it, if you start off with very little saved for college, maybe you can help here and there, but you're going to have to bridge the difference with student loans and pay for most of school with student loans, which is what a lot of people end up doing and why we have a full-blown crisis of student loans right now and college grads who just don't have the money, the income to pay those back. I have a lot of problems with student loans, and you cannot deny that the burden of these loans delays other life milestones. This is not something that parents often think about. They're really myopically focused on college. I want to go to the best school possible for my child. I want them to go to the best school. I don't care what it costs. But often, a decade or more after school is over, they have loan payments they're still repaying. The interest rates are fairly high, and they can't focus on other life milestones that they might be interested in because they can't buy a house. A lot of times they're not getting married, they're not having kids, they're delaying all these things because they're like, it's too expensive. I can't afford it. Why? Because I'm paying $1,000 a month still on my student loans. So I can't afford for a down payment on a house. I can't afford to pay for diapers or all the other expensive things that come with having kids, getting married, etc. So the two biggest principles that you want to keep in mind is we want to save as much as we possibly can before school starts for that peace of mind. And so we're not trying to just bridge that gap with an unknown future sum of student loans. That's scary. We want to avoid that. But we also never want to sacrifice retirement savings for paying for college. That is a very important rule or principle to keep in mind. And the second one is that student loans are a last resort, not the first option, last resort. So if you can pay for 70, 80% of college or post high school education costs and only bridge that gap with a smaller amount of student loans, that is not going to create a big burden, not going to take a ton of years to pay off post school, that would be ideal. Also, you have scholarships, they can work while going to school, attending a community college, getting credits prior to transferring to a four-year university if you're going the traditional college route. Those are all viable alternatives to using loans to help bridge that gap as well. So I'm not suggesting that you as the parent pay for 70, 80% out of pocket. I'm just saying we want to cover the cost of college. There's some other means. And so we're only taking a small amount of student loans, ideally none at all. Okay, so let's run the numbers here. If the average cost of college is $153,000 and we want to cover 70, 80% of that, it means you're going to need to save somewhere in the neighborhood of $110,000 to $120,000 per child for that total 4 years at university. Now, obviously, this is going to vary dramatically based on what schools and programs you're considering. So we're just using the average cost here. So I want to save $110,000 by age 18, and I'm going to assume it grows at 6% on average per year. If you start saving at birth, you only need to save about $275 a month to get to that 110,000 number, again, assuming 6%, which is a pretty reasonable growth rate. If you wait until they're halfway to college when they turn 9, you're going to have to save $750 a month or about $9,000 a year to get there. And if you wait until high school, which most parents do, you're going to need to save $2,000 a month, which is more than most people's mortgage. And at this point, it is still worthwhile to save and set aside because you will still earn some interest. You'll still benefit from some growth. But the vast majority of what you save for college at this point is going to be what you're going to have to fork over your hard earned dollars. You're not letting growth and the interest and the earnings you're getting from those investments to do the bulk of the work for you. Whereas if you start at birth, obviously you can save to, like 90% less over the course of their lifetime versus starting much later at high school. But again, we want to keep those two principles in mind. Save as much as you can afford without compromising your own retirement, and student loans as a last resort necessary. So we want to look at how to bridge that gap. If you aren't able to save $2,000 a month, if you don't have anywhere near $110,000 set aside for college, loans are not the answer. The only time I think it's worthwhile to consider any sort of substantial student loan amount is only when it's impossible to bridge that gap any other way, and only when it's for a high earning, high income career. So, like, for example, taking out a loan for medical school to become a doctor, that's something that, are you going to save $300,000 for medical school? It's going to be hard for most people. Probably not. But when you are going to school to become a doctor or some similar high potential, high earning career, you're going to be able to pay off that $300,000 because a lot of doctors, depending on what you're doing, you're going to easily be making six figures right away for most, if not all of your income. And depending on what kind of doctor you are, you could easily pay that off in a pretty short amount of time after school. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Ashley Mitchell, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.